the second reason why I have a problem with the term BAME is the fact that we're stated as ethnic minorities, and even though we are numerically, it's sort of a word that makes you sort of feel that you're less than, whether that's the tension or not. And so I would personally look for an acronym, or maybe ban all acronyms, but something that makes us feel empowered rather than remind us that we're struggling or that we're suffering or that we're at a disadvantage.
So my question is, what are some generational gaps we have found between one another?
Do you guys want to answer that first and tell us what you think of our generation, millennials and Gen Z?
I think your generation has had to be more sort of forthcoming, more at an earlier stage of your lives. It's almost been fed to you through school and youngly, probably parents as well, that you have to push harder and go faster and learn quicker. And it's been, I feel it's more intense for you. And I feel as if there are somewhat more limitations upon you with regards to career. Because I don't know if you had the same experience, ladies, but in my day, you could almost not quite walk into an office and ask for an interview, but you could apply for a job and you would not be judged or graded or, you know, rejected until you'd been through an interview stage. Whereas I find now, you don't stand a chance if you don't have the qualifications. And even just, you know, your name on paper, what that looks like, can be a decision maker as to whether you're accepted or rejected. Whereas I didn't find that so much growing up. I'm not sure if it was the same for you.
I think sometimes we were not aware of some of these things. Now it's more talked about in the context of, you know, how discrimination takes place. And so you're also more aware of different kinds of systems and networks. I think it's harder for you because, you know, you live in a very highly competitive world and a very globalized world. And, you know, there are a lot more challenges at a very younger age. And, you know, there isn't that enough space for you to grow. You have to mature very quickly and get on with life very quickly. And I think that's quite a challenge and tough times.
I think one of the things that has led to that is actually the whole advent of technology, the way that social media especially come to the forefront as you were growing up. So I've really seen that, you know, if I look at my daughter, my son, who are your kind of age group, that what they have to juggle with in terms of focusing on decisions about career, friends, but also satisfying their desire to be on top of things with technology, but not knowing when to stop, not knowing how to juggle everything in a way that's healthy and balanced. And I think we had it a bit easier. We didn't have to juggle so much. Life was very much more clear-cut and defined. And we didn't have news being thrown at us, what our peers thought of what we do. That wasn't bombarded to us, certainly growing up. So, yeah, I think you live in a very wonderful time because of globalization and access to so much, but yet much more challenging than what we ever had to face.
Does it feel like that for you?
It does indeed.
Yeah, I think I would agree that we have it easier in some senses because of technology, and we have everything at hand. However, I do think our generation is a generation of innovators. I think it's the time now, especially for women, where we're seeing that we can have opportunities or create our own and go into fields that, you know, weren't accessible for women. And we're starting to think outside of the box more. If I think about my parents' generation, which would have been your generation, I think one of the struggles that they talk about a lot was the fact that education wasn't so much prized in the same sense that it is today. It was, you have to go to work to drive income, especially coming from a BAME household. Whereas for us, my parents really encouraged education, and they pushed us a lot more than they claim their parents pushed them. So I do feel that, as you said, some of the opportunities are limited, but in the same sense, I do feel that we are creating our own opportunities. Yes. How do you guys feel?
I agree to us creating our own opportunities and pushing boundaries. But the one comparison or one thing that I keep seeing is that you guys were very focused growing up, like looking at my parents and hearing their stories and how they grew up. They were very focused in what they were doing. They knew exactly what they wanted to do. I think we have it harder. That's how I feel, that we have it harder. We have to juggle too many things, like you guys said. We have to deal with so much more. Okay.
I think you also have a lot more peer pressure, which is part of the issue, isn't it? Though you have a lot of exposure to information, which we never had, because we didn't have the internet a part of our lives. Yes. So we had to find information about stuff. Whereas for you, information is at hand, but that can also poses a lot more challenges.
So I am a firm believer in you have to be the change that you want to see. And I've had a wonderful 2 years being BAME officer at Royal Holloway University in the Student Union, where I hosted a great number of events and ran numerous campaigns to do with racial diversity and equality, racism, discrimination, colorism. And there were events or campaigns that offered me amazing opportunities outside of university, and they were very acclaimed and I won awards. But one of the things, even beyond the accolades, was the fact that I was having an impact on other students, BAME students specifically. So my next question is, what are your racial and ethnic identities, and what do they mean to you?
Should we go?
Yeah.
I mean, I can start. So I'm from Singapore and I'm a Singaporean Chinese. So in Singapore, that means that I'm part of the majority of the race makeup there. What it means to me, I think the way I see it is just my culture and my race is part of my comfort zone. It's what I'm familiar with, and that's just the starting point. But other than that, I feel like if I treat it that way, it can either be a blessing or a curse to me, because I can go back to it and it's something that's familiar, something that is, brings comfort when I need it, but at the same time it's not where I want to stay and not what I want to identify with all the time. Yeah.
So I'm a Black British-born Caribbean, and what that means to me is multifaceted. I mean, in regards to Jamaican history, I'm looking at slavery and I'm looking at struggle, but I'm also looking at resilience and sort of overcoming. And if I consider Jamaica, I see it as something that has had a global influence on the world, which I'm extremely proud of, in regards to music, food, dance, and so that's definitely something that I share and it's definitely something that I celebrate.
For me, I'm Sudanese. I don't know, if you ask me what my ethnicity is, I wouldn't know how to answer that, because Sudan as a country, I feel like we have an identity crisis. We don't know if we can say we're fully Africans or we can say we're fully Arabs. We're definitely not fully Arabs or fully Africans. It is an African country at the end of the day, but it's just a bit confusing. Like when I come here and people ask me, do you identify as an African? I do. Do you identify as an Arab? I kind of do as well. So it's kind of an identity crisis for me.
So I am biracial. I'm half Bayesian on my dad's side, and then on my mum's side, I'm mostly English, but also there's a little bit of Irish as well. And I grew up sort of in London, and so I consider myself mostly British, but obviously culturally I'm very much half and half, and I'm really proud of being half and half.
So both of my parents are from St. Lucia in the Caribbean, and I feel that a lot of people assume that I'm biracial, so they seem surprised when they see, because of the tone of my skin, they assume that there's a mix in my heritage, and there is, but it's further back. So most people don't need me to break down that, a certain percentage of on my mum's side was type thing. And so I just kind of allow people to assume whatever they like, if you like. But I find I was born here in London, in fact, and I was brought up here. And although I visited the Caribbean several times, I don't know how much I identify with it, although my household was very, very cultural. The foods we ate and the music we listened to and the, you know, the wider family and parties that we went to were all very, very culturally driven. But I think outside of that, being in school and things like that, I've never felt that I didn't belong in as a Londoner, as a British person. And so it's, for me, it's a bit of both. When I'm surrounded by other people from the Caribbean, there's not many that would say they're St. Lucian, so I feel like it's a little sort of gem. People always assume that you're Jamaican because, you know, that's the biggest country, and so I feel when I meet another St. Lucian person, there's a sudden kind of oh, you know, and then we kind of assume we're related because it's so tiny. But yeah, I love the fact that I'm St. Lucian, and yeah, it's never been a negative. There's never been a negative aspect to it for me personally. Yeah.
Well, I'm of Asian background, I'm Indian primarily, and I came to England actually when I was 9, and from the age of 9 till about 18, I was pretty much the only brown girl in not just the school, but even in the town. And in all those years, I remember actually feeling embarrassed about my skin color. I didn't want to be brown. I wanted to be white. I wanted to be like all the other children. And it wasn't until I went to university when I suddenly was exposed to people from all nations, all cultures, that I started to actually be aware of my culture and started to get my identity and in a way to celebrate my background and really develop a security in actually who I really was. So it's been an interesting journey for me to see that actually now if I look at Britain and see so many ethnic minorities embracing their culture, celebrating their culture, and I just think that's such a great message for young people growing up in really what is a Western nation with all the roots in, you know, the predominantly white color, white heritage. So yeah, so that's sort of the mixture that I come from.
So I'm born and brought up in India. I grew up until I was there, till I was age 23. I came here to do a PhD in you know, a DPhil at Oxford. So I had a scholarship. So I came here at the age 23. So being an overseas student, so that, you know, it didn't particularly affect me at the time. But since I started working, my ethnicity was something that was really came into question, because I work in a geography department, which is mainly white. It's a discipline which is completely white, middle class, quite privileged background, colleagues. So it did question my sense of belonging. You know, I've now lived here for more than 30 years, so you know, I've got used to being here. I like being in London. You know, I am a Londoner, but I'm also proud to be an Indian.
Hi, I'm Chinese. I came to England at the age of 22. So I'm very proud of being Chinese. I'm proud of the Chinese heritage, like the history, culture, everything. But on the other hand, because I came at the age of 22 and I really love British culture. So I feel quite privileged to be able to appreciate and embrace two types of cultures, and have two young daughters, but they are unlike me, so they were born here and they grew up in England. So there is kind of like identity, no, I won't say the issue, but problem, because when they ask them, you know, when people ask, where are you from, are you Chinese, and we also lived in Middle East for some time, so they can speak Arabic. So like there was one time they would speak Arabic to another lady at Agam train station. So basically she was so surprised why a Chinese girl speak Arabic. So then I have to explain to them, like, your parents are Chinese, because my husband is also Chinese, but you were born here, so you grew up here, you are English. But then we lived, because of this, our experience, we lived in different parts of the world. So I think the information or message I try to give my daughter is we are global citizens. So what matters is be a good person, regardless you are Chinese, English, or people think you are, you know, whoever person. What is most important thing is just be a good person.
So I'm also working with the School of Business and Management as a BAME ambassador. It's a part-time job. where we have to look at the attainment gap, and the school is really trying to understand why the attainment gap exists and trying to challenge all the stereotypes to really understand why it exists, and to just not assume the assumptions we hear about attainment gap and how BAME students, their achievements and all that. So my question is, do you think it's necessary to have a politically correct term that refers to a group of people like us, BAME, and millennials? Do you wish this term was available to you earlier?
I have two thoughts about this term, BAME. I'm on two different sides, two different feelings. On the one hand, I think it's great that we have built a community because we are in a white society, and we do have shared experiences to an extent where we've come to this country, we've born in this country, but we do feel othered. So it's great to build a sense of community, talk about the issues that we're going and how they relate to each other, how they're similar, and the differences are also important. However, I do fear that sometimes the term or labels can homogenize a group. Issues that pertain to Black people are different to the issues that attain to Asian people, and so forth. And so I feel like we have to get the balance right here. And also, the second reason why I have a problem with the term BAME is the fact that we're stated as ethnic minorities. And even though we are numerically, it's sort of a word that makes you sort of feel that you're less than, whether that's the tension or not. And so I would personally look for an acronym, or maybe ban all acronyms, but something that makes us feel empowered, rather than remind us that we're struggling or that we're suffering or that we're at a disadvantage. That's my personal opinion.
Do you agree that we'll never find a term that everyone can agree on, or everyone would be happy with?
Definitely. I think it's a very hard thing to ask for, because some people have issues with the term POC, people of colour, and so forth. So I don't know what the answer is. I just know how it makes me as well as others feel.
Okay, yeah.
Yes, I would also go along with that, I feel it's not necessarily a helpful term to help you to find your identity in Britain primarily. I prefer to think of myself as a British Asian.
Yes.
Because I'm in Britain, I'm British, I'm embracing everything about this country. I love this country, I honour it, but I also want to respect my Asian roots and the Asianness in me, and I bring that into pretty much everything that I do. And I expect people to respect that part of me as much as I respect their heritage and where they come from.
Definitely.
Have you ever felt the need to hide where you came from, or hide your background or culture?
For me, I feel like people only ask to put you under a certain category. So I don't like it when people ask. I'm very proud of where I come from, and I love Sudan because it's literally who I am. It has shaped me the way I am today. But I just feel like when people ask where you're from, it's just to put you under a certain category.
Yeah.
I think the question of hiding never comes in, because if you're brown skin or black skin,
there's no way you can
there's no way you can
Yeah.
hide it, and also your accent or the way you speak, or and so on and so forth. So I think the question of hiding never ever appears to me, and I never thought of saying that I'm not. So I that's a very irrelevant question.
Yeah.
I think when I saw this question, I agree with you. There's no way we can hide. From my appearance, you can guess at least I'm Chinese, or from Taiwan or Singapore. But I think the hideaway means I think I have met some students. I can tell they are British-born Chinese, or they grew up here. But they try to hide the background, the culture in a way of trying to remind people not think of them as Chinese because they grew up here. So to hide away their roots, not so make people feel they are fitted in this society. They are like native.
Though to talk about identity in that sense, I have British Asian friends, and many a times there are questions that are asked. Somebody says I'm British, and then somebody says, yeah, but where from? And so why does it matter? But so in that sense, yes, people do want to make. So I agree with Zainab in some sense that it's more about this trying to distinguish or differentiate between people. People don't particularly think. So when I'm working or I'm teaching, I don't particularly think I'm Indian or English. I teach what I want to teach. So I think it's an interesting thing to think about. Yeah.
I think it's an interesting question because, as you said, it's hard for us to hide. But I'm thinking about hidden identities and the erasure of brown and black people in teaching. We don't see ourselves reflected in the course content, in film and TV, as you were saying, dolls in stores. So I've never personally wanted to hide my identity because I feel like society already does that for me. It already erases me out of the context of society. So for that reason, I try to be visible and vocal because I've been hidden.
Yeah, I agree. When I think about conversations that I've had with people who ask me about where I'm from, I think I tend to share more with them rather than to hide because they already have this picture in their mind. So, why not actually let you know who I am?
Like allow you to write your own story and speak for yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I encountered, my husband and I run a lot of courses, mainly around relationships and marriage and that kind of thing. And one of the things we encounter a lot is mixed race couples or, biracial couples or two cultures coming together in a relationship and leading to marriage. And I have written a book about it, not about the races, but about being in relationships and preparing and that aspect of it that comes into the decision making and some of the, the prejudices that you may face, sometimes directly from the family of the person that you're entering into relationship from. And by writing that book, I ended up writing another book about my story and my upbringing, my journey. One of the things I really struggled with was not just my culture or my race, but the tone of my skin. And so I came across the very first day I started school, a group of girls decided that they didn't like me. And that because my skin tone was very light, that I thought I was better than them, and so for my whole time in secondary school, I was picked on because of the tone of my skin. So I wanted to ask: have you ever felt as if you couldn't identify with your culture, or how were you able to overcome this, or have you been able to overcome it, based on the experiences that you've had from sometimes people even in your own culture?
I think that for me, as someone who is so kind of wrapped up in two separate cultures, I've oftentimes felt like being with, say, for example, my mum's side of the family, who are all white English and Irish. There have been times where I don't necessarily fit in because I'm not entirely like them. And then the same with my dad's side of the family. I've also felt like at that point I'm almost too white for the black side of the family and too black for the white side of the family. It's very difficult to identify with both as much as I try to do so.
So do you feel like, I don't know if any of you, do you feel sort of that you have to try and conform to one or the other? Are you able to do both? Or
there was a point where I felt like that. But at this point, I think I'm really proud to be able to have both.
Okay. I think this is an interesting question because I think I see it in terms of being biracial, but also having like a hyphenated identity, so being Black, British, Caribbean, or whatever your hyphen may be, and the politics of that. So to what extent am I Black, as in African heritage? To what extent am I British and what does that mean? And then because I'm born in British, to what extent am I Caribbean? So I've had to grapple with the hyphen and what side of the hyphen, and that has been quite difficult in terms of identity.
So I'm married to a British English person, and so that is, there is a cultural difference between the Indian and the English, and you sort of, I understand what you're saying, is that you sort of adjust to those settings that you are in. and you adopt to those sorts of cultural things that you do. And of course you're, you know, and I mean my children sometimes say, oh, when I'm speaking to Indian people with Indian heritage, and you know, he says, oh, there comes the Indian accent back. And when I am back in the English setup, you know, there goes my English accent comes in. So it's I don't even realize it myself, but it happens so automatically.
So I've been a medical doctor for many years, a GP, and seen a real dramatic increase in the whole area of mental health issues, as we all know now, is huge problems across society. And latterly, I've actually left medicine to do more teaching and get people to understand that whole area and how to really be able to overcome it. And I know here, as a group of women, we've come from different backgrounds, different cultures. But I have a particular question for you, Johanna, just because I know a little bit about your background, that you've come from Singapore, a country where mental health, or even talking about mental health, is still pretty much a stigma. It's an embarrassment to admit that you have a mental health issue. But I also know that you've had to journey through that whole area of it being a bit of a struggle at a point in your life. So I just wonder if you could just share a little bit about how you've handled that, the stigma, but also the journeying through it, and where are you now with that?
Yeah, I'm quite happy to share a little bit of my story. So it must be about 6-7 years ago, I was dealing with depression and eating disorder, self-harm. That's very much in the past now, but at that time, because I was a teenager in Singapore, and I do feel that over the years the conversation has gotten louder about mental health, issues surrounding it. But especially in an Asian country, you know, where if it's embarrassing, if it's something that you don't really want to talk about, you sweep it under the rug. I think that was a big contributing factor to the reason I kept very, very quiet about the issues that I was struggling with for many years. I'm very thankful and very blessed that, you know, I had a family who eventually, when I was ready to be vocal about it, they were very supportive. But still, I think to this day, there are friends in my world who are very touchy about the subject. They don't really like, even when I bring things up about, you know, mental health. I'm very open about it, and I'm okay with that. But it's interesting to see how people react to that, especially in Singapore. And it was actually really refreshing when I moved to the UK, because I realised that yes, there's still stigma here, but the conversation is definitely going, I think, a lot faster, and it's so necessary, because you know, I'm quite passionate about it, that just because it's your brain and not any other organ doesn't mean you have to be quiet about it. Yeah.
Dr. LAVANYA, because you obviously have so much experience in terms of medical help and mental health, do you have any advice that you would give to women facing mental health challenges in this era?
Yes, I would say, just based on all that I've learned and even what I've observed in latter years, I would say probably the most important thing is for women to find a community that they can belong in. There's something about belonging which is totally the opposite of isolation and loneliness. That belonging just does something in you, helps you to form your identity, but also just releases all the right brain chemicals to start to make you feel better about yourself, about your world. And I feel that even just belonging in a community starts to give you a sense of purpose. That when all of us have a sense of purpose, purpose causes hope to arise, causes something in us to come alive. And that is really probably the best antidote to depression and anxiety even. And probably just another thing to add is to also say to people with mental health problems, be kind to yourself. There's so much information and studies coming out about the importance of rest, taking time out, exercise, movement, all those sort of things. But what they all boil down to, the one primary thing is just to be kind to yourself, allow yourself to have some time out. Yeah, those I would say would be the top things in terms of overcoming mental health problems.
Yeah, I mean, I have this question to Johanna and ZAINB, because you both moved from a different country here, similar to me in some sense, you know. So how do you define a community, you know, and the idea of belonging? You know, do you feel belonging to here? And you know, is it based on race or culture?
Do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, so I moved not too long ago, about 2.5 years now from Singapore. And for me, I think community, it comes down to understanding, you know, how much are you willing to understand the other party. For me, that's what builds community. It's just a small example. It's a really small story, but it stuck with me. When I went to Korea for a holiday with my friends a couple of years ago, we all speak English as our first language, so don't speak any Korean. And so, I mean, there was not much communication, you know, difficulties, but sometimes there was. And I remember we were walking down the streets and I heard someone speak English, and then I just turned around really excitedly. I couldn't help myself because I was like, oh, like, you know, it's my people, but whatever that means. But it was really funny because in that moment I realized that someone who understands me in terms of language and communication was more important to me than whether you look like me or not. So I think, you know, as human beings, we're always trying to find people who understand our expression. And, you know, just because you're a certain color, why does that have to contribute to how you express yourself? Yeah.
For me, I think it doesn't have anything to do with race, but it has more to do with the culture of the place you're in. Like, I moved around from Malaysia, I went back to Sudan for a couple of years, and now I'm here. I feel like whenever I start to settle down, I get moved to a different country. So finding a community, I'm only starting to realize now that a community is more of a place you feel comfortable in, you feel safe, you feel understood, you're not really judged, and you can just be whoever you are. So that's what a community is for me. What are your thoughts? Like, what's a community for you?
Oh, yes, I pretty much agree with what you said. Community is like, it's a safe surrounding. You feel comfortable to be in, and you feel, especially feel comfortable to be okay, not be okay in front of those people. Like, it's regarding to the mental health we were talking earlier. So I think for me, I always believe that it's okay to be not okay. We are all human beings, and the community, I would feel comfortable and feel belonging to is that environment makes me, you know, have the room for me to making errors, so be understood by people around me. So that's what community means to me.
It's interesting because although I'm a black woman and I was brought up here and born here, I found that I'm quite often not fully comfortable when I'm surrounded by all black people.
Yeah.
And I think a big part of that is because of my experiences, particularly in my career. I think because of my first job as a very young girl was in a bank, as I mentioned before, and it was in central London. And so I think from quite a young age, I was already being exposed to different cultures and different experiences. And almost, I mean, it's wrong to say no culture, but in a sense that there wasn't a sort of predominant culture that rules that environment like I got at home, for example. And so, and I went from there and I began to work in event management, where I was in environments where, again, it wasn't driven by a particular culture. And I got very used to being around a certain type or predominantly white environment, but it was more of the corporate side of things than the actual culture of things. Do you know what I mean? So there became expectations around your performance and things like that. And so I didn't really see individual people or groups of people and the things that they did. I saw a level of excellence that was required in what I was doing, or a particular event that we were working on and what the theme was around that event. So it became more of that for me. So when I then went into environments like a particular areas or a marketplace or something like that, I remember feeling quite uncomfortable and thinking, I'm not used to this. And that's wrong, because I'm a black woman, I should be used to this. And so I found myself feeling more comfortable in corporate environments or mixed environments or environments where race or culture wasn't the focus, you see. And then I remember meeting some friends who, you know, the husband is, he's from an African country. He was born here. His parents are from an African country, but two different tribes. His wife, her father was Pakistani, her mother was English. They now have children. What category do you put them in? And I love that. And I love the fact that there's no label for them. They have 4 different cultures, or 3 cultures and 2 races within them. So when they're at school and someone says, well, where are you from? What do you say? And I thought, I love that. I love the fact that we're no longer having to feel that we've got to segregate ourselves and only be comfortable in what others or ourselves would identify ourselves as.